one thing I want to say is that as I was sort of, I'm kind of a quotes person, and it helps me keep going when times are tough. And they were sort of tough trying to teach, courses. And I had 3 courses and 600 students, in the fall as we were transitioning to COVID. And I had this new capstone, which I had hoped to be similar to like what my Koenig's group is doing. I'd hoped to be going into actual jails and talking to inmates and people that had been released, and as well as talking to staff, because I'm very interested in both the experience for people that are incarcerated as well as the experience for people that are working in those systems. I've been interested in that ever since I worked at Mendota Mental Health Institute on units, and since I've worked in prisons and jails with people. I just sort of the understanding of sort of the trauma going on for both sides in that situation. So I was very excited about that, and it just all sort of changed. So I kept telling myself, okay, you're just playing ball and running water. I'd read that book years ago, and it was just sort of, what do? You just keep sort of doing. It is what it is. While you're also trying to help your students through sort of this, the chaos of that. And also, for me, I think a lot of my students were really hoping to go in and talk to people with lived experience. And, we were realizing that that was going to be challenging if we were able to do that at all. So at one point as I was getting ready for this and realizing we're going to be sort of having to just, adapt on the fly based on what was happening with the pandemic. Someone said, why don't you just teach a non-CBL course? And I thought that was actually a good question, maybe an excellent question at that point, because it's a lot easier to teach a regular class because we just have more control. It's like I've got my package together, I've got my articles together, I know what I'm going to be talking about with that. Some people think of it as more scholarly too, so you don't have to sort of explain what you're doing and why lived experience is as relevant as other kinds of experiences. But I just really believe and still believe, and I'm going to be teaching this course again in the fall and spring next year, that, we can't learn about reentry without, engaging with the community, and by reading psych journal articles or, watching videos that feel sort of distanced too. Not that they're not helpful, but there's a distance there. And, we really want to, and it was one of the things I felt so inspired about with this class, and my initial plans for the class is what are the experiences of justice involved individuals and, the community members working with them or people working within the facility. How can we improve this system? And I don't know how you do that without really encouraging community engagement. And then one of the things that, and other people who have done community-based learning may have realized this from students, or you will realize it as you're starting to do it, is that students oftentimes feel like and not just that they feel like that, it's actually what's happening. They write a paper and they send it out, and the TA or the professor grades it, and then they get feedback about, their writing skills and, critical thinking ideas, kinds of things, but then nobody reads it. Maybe their mom or somebody like that reads it, but nothing's happening with that. And one of the things I emphasized, even with our sort of adapting kind of class this fall, was that you're going to create a product that people are going to use and want and appreciate, because you are spending time that other people don't have in the community to develop this, project. And what in psychology isn't something everybody knows. You have an education that is sort of, relevant and that you can have confidence in. And, in my larger class, I show them clips of psychologists testifying in court that demonstrate that they're testifying about things we've just learned in class. That they probably don't want to go into court with their undergrad degree, but that they know that same material. It's actually relevant, and actually people don't know that material and that information. So I tried to think about it as how can we create a product, for the county, and I'll talk about the county in a minute. And then, how can we take what we know in psychology and sort of pull that together in a way that might be relevant for people that don't have the time, because they're playing ball on running water too, right? They're just trying to keep up with all the other demands of their work. And particularly with COVID, as stressful as it is for us, imagine being in the jail or trying to run a homeless shelter, or all the other things that are occurring with COVID. So one of the things that I think really motivated me and is still motivating me despite all the changes is that, and I wanted to use to motivate students is, why should we care? And I encourage students to say that even when they're giving presentations, because we all have that experience of sitting and listening to people and thinking, why am I supposed to care about this? Or how is this relevant to, anything out in the real world? And so I just want to emphasize a little bit about why I care about this. And I realize you all may know this information, but I'm just going to, so I'll go through it quickly. We have a terrible reentry system. We do not give a warm welcome, bring people back into the community. It's really a problem. And I think it's actually getting a lot of attention now in a way that has been ignored, I think, for a long time. About 37% of the inmates released in 2010 are reincarcerated after 3 years. That's actually somewhat of a decline from previous years. Half of those people are back within 1 year of release. And if you study reentry, which my class did, and what we've been doing is you realize, oh, that just makes perfect sense that people aren't able to stay out in the community. Over 80% return to prison on a revocation only, meaning that at least their initial transfer back into prison isn't due to a crime or being convicted of a new crime, but some kind of violation of their parole supervision. About a third of those are then eventually sentenced due to whatever it is that resulted in them being revoked. But I always like to flip percentages. About 2/3 were not eventually sentenced due to whatever resulted in them being revoked. So they had some kind of issue with their probation and parole agent. A common one that I would see when I was working and doing evaluations with sexual offenders in the community was one of the rules was that they couldn't develop a romantic or sexual relationship with anybody without that person first coming in to talk to their probation and parole agent. So if you think about the stigma of having a sexual offense conviction, maybe unrelated to anything that this would affect this current relationship. And then you're out of prison and you're trying to start a relationship, and first thing you have to tell the person before they even agree to be in a relationship with you is that they need to come meet with your probation and parole officer first. If not, you're going to get picked up and go back to jail or prison. So a lot of people don't do that. That's a classic revocation for that population. So we're doing a poor job with reentry, and people are starting to pay attention to that, which is really what I think motivated the formation of the class. And also for me, really this idea that psychology can help with this field. We know things that are relevant. And one of my key questions that I asked my larger crime class, and then I asked the smaller capstone class to think about is, why are you not in prison right now? What is it about you and your life that means that you're sitting here in class or in COVID times, in your room or whatever on the computer that has resulted in you not being in prison? So we don't just want to understand why people commit crimes, but we also want to understand why people do not commit crimes, or what kinds of supports are in place for that. And we can do that by examining our own lives and understanding all the things that have, been present for us that have kept us out of the criminal justice system. So psychology knows a lot about how people change, how we can support people, and even actually, how we can improve these systems. The other thing I really emphasized in this class and in my larger class that I think is really important is when I'm going through the syllabus, and they've gotten longer and longer with all the things we include. But one of the most important things, or one of the many important things I should say, that we include are the statement on diversity. And one of the things that I started to do very early on in teaching my larger crime class, and have really emphasize to students in my smaller class too, is that when we're talking about diversity and inclusion and equity kinds of issues, we need to understand that we may be sitting right here in a class with somebody who's been in prison, with someone who has loved ones who are in prison, or been released for prison. They may have been a child that grew up and was affected by the fact that their mother or father was incarcerated, and really encouraging people to think about that this is happening right here in our classes, which has been my experience. The more I talk about this explicitly in class, the more I have students come up to me and say, yeah, that was really hard for me. My dad was in prison when I was growing up, or my mom was incarcerated, or my brother's in prison right now. I've been in prison. I don't tell anybody that, but I wanted to let you know I appreciate you including that. I'm hearing a lot of that from students. So just really encouraging people to think about people that have been justice involved or impacted by that, in many ways aren't really reached out to and included in a way that we would want people to include other people with other kinds of experiences. So that's been an important part of these classes. And I think I'm particularly struck by how many students have come up to me and talked to me about that. So let me tell you about this project. And what I had hoped to be presenting by this point would have been, a nice qualitative study where I'd gone in and been in with students, and we've been able to interview people in the facility and associated staff, and then also in the community. So that was my initial goal. But let me talk about how this sort of developed. I've been doing, I have a community-based work experience, I guess, basically, and some institutions too, but I'm a clinical psychologist who came to academia or teaching really late, and sort of unexpectedly, really, just by chance, I think, started to teach a class and then another class, and thought it was really nice to work with people that weren't in prison or about to go to prison. And so I signed up to be a fellow, was accepted to be a fellow for the Mortgage Center program, and it really just energized me, and it made me so excited about all the things that were happening on campus. And so I'm doing that, and I'm still teaching my crime class, and I get contacted by Gavin Luter, who runs the University Alliance program. And Gavin said Brown County, which is the Green Bay area, is looking for somebody to look at their prison reentry system, just look at what's happening and how to improve that system. And I was very excited about that, and the possibilities really with that. And if you've worked with Gavin, he's a wonderful, energetic, really helpful person with that. So it's very, very excited about that process and those options with that. And so luckily I'd spent the year mentoring some new large intro psych faculty to teach in our department, because I've been teaching a large class for many years for just intro psych students. So I'd been doing that mentoring. We've been hiring more people in the department. So I was able to approach the department about doing this as a capstone. And they were incredibly supportive and able to be supportive, because we now had somebody that could take over one of the courses I had been teaching. So it all just kind of fell into place. And you can sort of see on the slide off to the side with this, evidence-based practices in prisoner reentry. What does the research say? That's really the cover page for what we were able to provide to Brown County at the end. But it was a perfect sort of flowing together, I think, of all of my interest in this area, and then the capacity to teach and also help students, mentor students really in being able to sort of do some things that they hadn't been able to do in their typical classroom experience. So our community partner goals were, how do we improve reentry? And I would like to applaud Brown County for even asking that, connecting with the university, alliance, and also then even asking that question. How as a county can we improve that? How can we use the university resources to learn about that? And one of the key things that if you're doing community-based work, you'll run into is a really important thing for students to understand is one of the questions was when I talked to their reentry individuals trying to get a sense of how we would be helpful is what is actually happening. And I have been surprised over the years just practicing when I learned, 15 years into working in Madison that there's this fabulous program I should have known about 15 years ago and nobody sort of knows about it. And what they were saying in Brown County is we don't even know what's happening here. And an example of this that I thought was really remarkable things for students to learn experientially is one of the people they went out and did interviews. I'll sort of talk a little bit about that process, but one of the things they did was they talked to the chaplain at the jail in Green Bay. And the chaplain had vast resources, all tabulated and pulled together, and other people didn't know the chaplain had those resources. And that's sort of just classic. And they were open about that. They're saying, we don't know what's happening here, and we don't know how to effectively refer people to resources. We don't know what's occurring. And so that was really helpful for students to realize. The other things students have realized in the fall and spring with this class is, wow, if it's this hard for us to figure out what's going on and what's available for a resource, how is it possible at all that somebody coming out of jail or prison would have any idea how to access these resources? Or an overworked and underpaid probation and parole officer, how are they going to know all these things when we are, spending all of our class time and 25 of us trying to find these things out? So that was really Brown County's goal, really to their credit, I think, to really ask the question and be interested in sort of mapping and finding these things out. So as a pandemic was unfolding, it was still not clear, even within the first month of the class, that we were not going to be able to go into the jail, right? So if you can remember those sort of fluctuating times, and Brown County was okay with us going in. And I had support from the Mortgage Center for funding and all of those things to make that happen. And I asked about that on the university level, and basically was sent the COVID stats in Brown County, and no way we're going to be able to do that, which I think was a completely reasonable response. But I was still sort of hoping that our numbers were going to go down. This was all going to become, manageable, which obviously seems naive in retrospect. So the other way, so we know we're not going to be able to do that piece. So for me, I'm pivoting to let's talk to people virtually that we can talk to. It was going to be really complicated with the jail captain to be able to do that with people in the jail. They were open to trying to make it work, but they don't have really the technology for that, or didn't have that set up yet. So we were going to just focus on what we could find out about community members. And then the other impact that was happening was the contact person for this project was the head of the COVID response in Brown County. And so I think just by second semester, even though I don't feel like we were really hitting them very hard for much, we were just out, sort of interviewing people in the community. They were just like, we don't have the bandwidth for that. I don't think they used exactly that language, but basically we are overwhelmed. I'm managing now the testing and I'm trying to keep people alive in our institutions and facilities, and also now going to be managing the whole vaccine distribution. So we sort of hit a pause button with that. And I found out about that about 10 days before I had to start second semester class. So that was another sort of, playing ball and running water experience. But let me talk about what we were able to provide. And I think one of the things I want to emphasize is that even though it turned out to not be what I envisioned, we were able to do a lot, and students were really proud at our final presentation day, and people talked about everything they did. We pulled together evidence-based practices, not in a paper format, which I think is hard for non-academics to read, but in, annotated bibliography format. We had over 60 pages, and we sort of had it set up with sort of academic articles, as well as, here's the clip for the Sesame Street thing for working with families and, and parents incarcerated. A lot of resources pulled together too. So really quite a nice package. And then students did over 40 interviews of professional and community members. And it was really helpful for students, and I think for Brown County on a couple different levels. One is that, students realized you can look at this reentry data and just be overwhelmed by, how poorly we're doing as, a society in terms of giving a welcome back to people coming out of our facilities, and no wonder they end up back in. But you can also, as you talk to people, find all the people that are so energized, motivated, and doing their piece to move this forward. And so it was a really positive thing too. You were sort of realizing, strengths that are present. And then also we talked about those in terms of wish lists, things that people would want to see present. One of the things students realized, for example, was that Brown County has the most expansive alternative court program in the state of Wisconsin. They have many more alternative courts and are really dedicated to that. So students were able to talk to a judge. One student called a sheriff, and we'd done a lot of interview practice and active listening skill. And they called the sheriff, who's like, I don't have time to talk to you. Talked for 45 minutes. So just really sort of a number of people really concerned about this issue, because nobody likes to feel like, what you're doing and all the work you're doing is just, part of this revolving door process. So that was really important for students, and I think for Brown County. And people in Brown County said, wow, I can't believe our county is concerned about this, or that people are even interested in this. Wow, look, what can I do to help? Can I come talk to your class? Can I send you things? It was really an inspiring piece for students. And I had in my mind what wasn't happening that I wanted to happen. But for students, that wasn't so much the case. And in fact, just doing interviews, one of my favorite quotes was the student saying, my mom tells me I need to be able to call people and talk to them and get information. I don't like to do that. I'm pretty uncomfortable doing that. And this has been really helpful. And I can tell my mom I've done this. And so now I feel like I'm going to be able to do this again. And I'm emphasizing that because for me, I had not known that was something students, these are seniors, right, in the program, would be uncomfortable or unsure of how to do, right? That I was not expecting that to be one of the major growth outcomes for the class, but consistently in our final long reflection, that's what students talked about. That really pushed them out of their comfort zone. The other thing that pushed them out of their comfort zone is that emphasizing to students, I don't know the answer. So when you go find something, I'm not going to have already known that and just sent you out on some kind of exercise to see if you could also figure it out. I don't know. Brown County doesn't know. You're actually figuring this out. You might know more about this area than anybody else does. And I think that was a really valuable lesson for students. So let me just talk sort of briefly about how we did this. One of the things I realized just being networked in the community around prison issues and starting to sort of follow some of these things myself was that there was a virtual Nehemiah Reentry Conference starting up. And I happened to have, money, a pocket of money from having done the Mortgage Center program or community-based learning program that I could then use for my class to attend this conference. So we're supporting Nehemiah, and then they're also able to attend remotely. They found that just incredibly meaningful. And so I'm finding that out in August, and I'm figuring that out, okay, we're going to do this. And then had them pick an area of interest because I was going to break them into groups from that conference. And really, we spent a lot of time reflecting on that. And then we realized that around that time, it was about the end of September, we're not going to get into the jail. So, okay, class, here are our goals. Here's the way we're going to go about gathering that. And I'd like people to do virtual interviews, and we're going to map out resources that are available in the community. And we're going to kind of combine those. So we're going to simultaneously sort of use the academic and other media, and we're going to create one, product. And then we're also going to talk to people and figure out what's going on in Brown County, and just sort of emphasizing that we're still meeting those goals for them. So we were in person initially. I don't know if I mentioned that. Then we went to Zoom classes, and then we went, we had 25 students, which doesn't show up even nice on a Zoom screen. And I think what we did to cope with COVID is something I'll continue to do each semester. Is I realized I can't have people, I can't lose people, and I can't see what's happening for people because we're remote, and students are struggling, and they're getting COVID, and they're, in quarantines, and their Wi-Fi isn't working. We're having all kinds of issues. So I just set up much more of a systematic way to be monitoring their progress and having them turn in assignments that I would think that I would typically do. And just sort of slow and steady move to the end product. And at the end of the semester, students were like, oh, I'm kind of used to, in November, writing my paper, and I might have to do one presentation in a capstone or in a class. And I've never had a class where I just worked slowly and each week towards this end product. And I'm so proud of myself. Heard that a lot, that I could actually accomplish so much if I broke it down. And of course, we all know we all wish we could do that. And it's also the way most of us accomplish our work, right? We don't just sort of sit and listen to things for 3 months and then binge out a paper or a talk. So it was a really valuable piece. And so we divided into 6 groups. If you're doing group work, one of the things I learned, at least during Zoom, is I'm at 4 this semester. It's a better number in terms of connecting with people. I also recommend you bring in Corey Sprinkle. So a big shout out to him. I had him come in really early, really introduce this idea of community engagement, really trying to anchor the class in the goal, not just why we should care about prisoner reentry, but why we should take this format to try to learn about and address these issues. And things that Corey talked about came back all semester. Nothing about us without us is for us. We, obviously an issue about prisoner reentry in terms of both people that are or have been incarcerated, and also the people working with them in that system. Students reflected on that, and they just kept coming back to that, even in their reflections that didn't mention this all semester, and in their final reflections. Really learn the value of listening, I think, and listening to lived experience and how relevant that is. That it adds the emotional piece, which most students that had my class, we talked about sort of this. My larger class, this head and the heart connection, the Brian Stevenson, push, really, that we can learn things, but can we feel them, and what are we going to really remember? And we remember most if it has some kind of emotional connection for us. And then a lot of students, this also surprised me, is that, practicing active listening was something that was, and these are senior psychology students, pretty a key transformative piece of learning for them. And not just in their personal life, but hey, I can call this person, and just like you taught us in class, if I start active listening, they'll talk to me for hours about this, because I'm asking them questions about themselves. One of the reflections I shared with Corey early on was from a student, was that this is the only time in my entire undergraduate years that anyone has ever talked about just being a decent person in one of my classes. And I hope that's not true, but it's what the student really took away was that, oh, Corey came in and talked about community engagement, and he really talked about being respectful and decent and, interested in other people's experiences. It was a key sort of powerful takeaway from them. So if you're doing this work, he's a great resource. And one of the things that happened to me, I think, in the course of that semester was I'm thinking about this quote myself, right? Nothing about us without us is for us. And really applying that to my teaching and students, and sort of like, that this is we are doing this. I'm not telling you what to do. I mean, I'm providing structure, obviously, and deadlines, but it's like, we're doing this. And it's, there's nothing right or wrong about your reflections or how you conducted this interview. What can we do? And so students play a pretty major role in sort of directing the course when they're, presenting a project and, doing asset maps. It's like, you be creative. You think about what you want your summary page to look like. You can do that. So sort of, stepping back myself and thinking about, if you're offering a class to somebody, let them, rise to that occasion. And it makes some people really uncomfortable because what's the rubric? How are you going to grade me? How is this going to work? And, but it's a really important preparation, I think, for the real world once you graduate. But also, I don't think we can teach people to sort of think about another population and think about, what do they need if what we're modeling within our classroom is something different than that. So I don't say that I got this perfectly down with this, but it really transformed how I started to think about my teaching. And I think the reflections were really important. And I have to say, I was initially not a real reflections person. They felt a little vague, but you're basically helping people gain confidence in their ability to think in their own unique and valuable insights and, their lived experience as a student going through your course. So I have weekly reflections now, and sometimes with prompts, single space, at least one page, really encouraging people to do that. And helping people sort of learn to work in a group, learn to think about, and feel pride in their product. It's not just for a grade, it's useful. I think it's really an important piece of sort of this lifelong learner goal, which I think community-based learning really, and engagement really emphasizes. So, I noticed that even in my service courses where people would go out and volunteer, and I would make, I would, require that they set up their own volunteer experience. And many of them were like really anxious about that. And they came away from that experience saying, oh, I'm going to volunteer in the community now. I know how to do that. I can do that. They sort of learn listening as a life skill, hearing others. In my field, we talk a lot about motivational interviewing, and I think in other fields too. And I know when I go to those trainings, and I think it's an important thing to think about, I think it's really basically what we're talking about, and respectful engagement with other people. What do people want? How can we meet them where they're at? And how can we work on what they're motivated, to work on? It's very interesting because we talk about this in an academic way. And then like this semester, we had formerly incarcerated people connected with Just Dane come in and meet, in small groups with my class. And they're saying the same thing. And it's just sort of as a reinforcing of the, the connection of some of the things we're talking about in a more distanced way and what we're hearing from the people with actual lived experience. So student learning goals. They're learning from academic and non-academic sources. That was a big push for me. That they, I suggest, of course, I suggest that they follow on Facebook things like Just Day, Nehemiah, and Moses. I can almost see them all sort of rolling their eyes about that. And, my TAs are like, really, Patty, it's Twitter, right? That they would be following these groups, but really telling them about it. Hey, have you checked out the Prison Policy Initiative, the Vera Institute of Justice, all of those kinds of things, programs out there. And you get all kinds of information. It's been kind of a transformative thing for students to realize that information is even out there. And also I would hope that they would continue to follow and pay attention to that after our class, because it's not like, hey, follow some clinical psych journal article, right? You're following sort of interesting things that are occurring in the community. I'm a big believer, if I could run the world where we wouldn't even have grades, of course I don't do that, but I don't run the world, and also I have to do grades. But I want people to present in class and learn to convey this information, think about things that excited them and then convey that. And then I just give them feedback on how to improve, and then they do it again. And they incorporate that, and then they do it again. And so it's not so much like, oh, you're great on that presentation was this. It's like, here's how you should improve, and let's try that again next week. And so, that's, I think, been freeing for students to do that as well. The asset mapping thing that Corey emphasized early on, and is a new thing for me, is transformative. I think it really is this idea of looking for strengths. And I've heard people talk about this before as sort of, are you a problem pointer outer, or are you a problem solver, or are you both? And, sort of thinking about looking for strengths as a way to really, to feel hope in many ways, which then inspires you to work towards change. So I think I've already talked about this, but this is, continuing with the play ball and running water. What did I do second semester? And one of the reasons I'm emphasizing this is I learned very late that I had to sort of do some restructuring of this class. And also, if I wanted to be community engaged, I had to connect with some community partners, and I had to do it pretty quick. Luckily, Just Dane I'd worked with before when they were Madison Urban Ministry. And I had, had connected with Nehemiah through this, conference. So I reached out to them. They're wonderful organizations working around prisoner reentry things right here in Dane County. They were totally excited and open about doing that. I got students signed up to volunteer in the Nehemiah Court Observation Program. I signed up myself to do that. We had Just Dane come in and present two classes, basically, sort of a larger group presentation. And then coming in, we had 6, I think, formerly incarcerated individuals come in and do small breakout groups and just sort of talk to students about their experiences. I had connected with a friend about Rudy Bankston and reached out to him. He's someone who's a formerly incarcerated individual doing lots of great work in Dane County and writing, and worked on getting money to pay them. I think that's going to be one of my biggest obstacles possibly in the future, but really recognizing the value of supporting these agencies and organizations and people with lived professional experience. And so we set up a situation where students are doing, the same kind of annotated bibliography and summary thing, but also really looking just at Dane County, which frankly just felt more manageable for me with this, quick sort of reframe, and has been pretty exciting for students. So I don't want to spend a lot of time with this, but I'd be happy to share my syllabus with anybody, and I'm sure you could improve it dramatically, but I came up with just a lot of structure. I think I mentioned that earlier. I think it helps students, and it also helps you sort of make sure, especially if you're doing group projects, which I really recommend, that you're sort of watching and making sure everybody's, reinforced for contributing to that process. I want to show you one thing here that I think is in this slide that is just part of the experience you don't kind of expect when you're teaching, community engaged work. So this is a screenshot of a court hearing. So these are the things that we've been observing in COVID times in the court system. And so you see the judge and you see the ADA, the assistant district attorney, you see what looks like a very tired defense attorney off in the corner. And then you see the person who's, at this hearing, and they're presenting through this jail. These are the slots to their door. So you can see that they've got their system there, and you have to kind of, get down to, because this is usually where food trays and stuff are going. You have to kind of get down and look through that to talk. And so watching that occur for me and my students was just, it's so disturbing, right? And so, and you're just watching that and you're thinking, well, does it have to happen that way? And I'm thinking, I have been in these jails, and there are ways you could, with COVID, have somebody in a glass room and be in another setting. And so, and there was a lot of concern based on Nehemiah and students talking about that this was somehow going to become kind of normalized, right? Even after COVID, in terms of how this dehumanizing interaction for the person who's in court. So people started pushing back, and thank goodness for a lot of retirees that are volunteering and have a lot of time and have been trained like in a way that I know my mother always emphasized, write your people that are in government and let them know what you think. And this has gotten news coverage. I don't know if you've followed this, but they're actually changing this. So this is not going to be the norm. This would be some exception and to the norm. And in this hearing, this judge is saying, hey, wait a minute, why is this person presenting like this? I thought we weren't going to do this anymore. So that was a really nice, real world, inspiring message for my students that I didn't really expect, which is, hey, you see something that's dehumanizing and a problem? Talk to somebody about it, go to court hearings, do something about it, let people know. And then other people are all of a sudden having to, deal with the fact that this is a practice. It's been going on for months, which is now changing because of Nehemiah's court observation program. So I found that to be an amazing learning experience. So I think that, as a takeaway, and I want to open this up for question, I don't think you could probably teach community-based learning or engaged classes without having this idea that the ground is going to be changing under your feet. Hopefully it's not because of something like COVID again, but it's harder than not doing that, but it is so worth it. And, I think for students and for instructors, and I was really tired at the end of first semester with all of the class stuff that was going on, and I still felt like it was worth it. And I felt sort of teared up watching my students do their final presentations, because it felt like it was so such an important experience for them. And then reading their reflections and all that it meant personally, and then academically, and for them, and sort of thinking about them now going out in the world and graduating with that kind of understanding and experience. It was worth it. So that's what I would emphasize to Pearlie and Dan and other people that are going out and doing that kind of work.